Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the webinar, The Future of Road Freight. This is the first webinar of our STORM project, and this will be the agenda that we will follow today. So we will have a small introduction talking about what the STORM project is and its objectives, and then we will have the first panel discussing technology and trends on freight, the second panel addressing policy drivers and barriers, and then we will have our wrap up and our goodbyes. So a few attention points today. So this webinar is recorded and will be made available online through our projects channel, and also the list of the attendees, name plus organizations, might be included in one of the STORM projects deliverable. With your presence and contributions, you agree that the STORM consortium can use and obtain the rights to use all the content in this webinar. For the webinar, if you wish to make to pose a question, you can do so in the question box. Please, if you want to ask a question to a specific speaker, just write down the name of the person you are asking your question to. Last but not least, we will be using Slido to ask you your contribution to this discussion. You will be able to connect that link with the hashtag STORM project, or you can scan the QR code and it will be shown throughout the meeting as well. So without further ado, I pass the presentation floor to Jancho Todorov from VTT, who is also the coordinator of the STORM project. So, Jancho, thank you very much. Yeah, we can see your screen now.
Thank you, Carmela, for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to see you online. Before we dive deeply in different problems and challenges in freight and logistics, during the panel discussion, I would take a few minutes to briefly present the STORM project. The STORM project started in January 2021, and it's a project that will last for 30 months till June 2023. It has been funded under the Horizon 2020 program under the call MG48 for advanced research methods and tools to support transport and mobility researchers, planners, and policymakers. The main focus of the project is to identify and screen new data sources, develop novel methodologies, and generate use cases, including the latest trends in freight and logistics transport. Here on this slide, you can see the project partners. The consortium is led by VTT, the Technical Research Center in Finland, and we have partners here today on this call from Fraunhofer Institute of System Innovation Research in Germany, partners from Chambers University of Technology, Department of Space, Earth and Environment. We also have a consortium partner from Czech Technical University in Prague, and we have also as partner Ertico ITS. Besides the participants in the project consortium, we keep in touch with a wide group of stakeholders. They're part of the project advisory board. As you can see, we're collaborating with the major stakeholder organizations in Europe, which are related to freight and logistics, and also with plenty of different companies. We also keep in touch with a wider list of companies that are following the developments of STORM project, and they will participate in our events and also in our stakeholder meetings that are forthcoming later on. Briefly about the objectives of the project. As you can see, one of the big objective is to screen existing trends and challenges in freight transport, and we are focusing on the digitalization of markets and transport system, together with latest trends related to decarbonization and automation of the transport. What we strive to do in this project is to identify and analyze the needs and the knowledge gaps that cannot be met by the current models and tools. One big portion of the works is also related to new data sources with specific emphasis on big data, how to collect new data sources related to freight and logistics, how to store, process, and analyze them. We also strive in the project to create a synthesized data for broader use applications as we strive to develop a couple of use case scenarios, and of course to elaborate data management and analysis strategy. One big portion of work also is dedicated to elaboration of new and advanced analysis frameworks, models, and tools to address the new needs for analysis of the structural changes in logistics and freight transport. And then to illustrate all the developments in the project, by the second half of the project, we are developing 3 case studies related to zero-emission freight, inner city logistics, and policy analysis. And by the end of the project, we strive to wrap up all the developments coming out of the STORM project and structure the information for relevant stakeholder groups and provide them in digested way opportunities for new business. A bit more about the use case scenarios. As said, we are developing 3 use case scenarios. Currently, they are developed on a general level, and we'll be happy to collaborate with partners, mostly from the business, in order to further shape the case scenarios in order to make them more closer to the real cases. The first scenario set is zero-emission freight. What we strive to do there is to analyze truck movement data for zero-emission trucks and then put some thoughts on how to design optimal charging network for electric road freight. Then the second scenario is related to green city logistics, where we strive to organize a virtual city model and then try to optimize the transport flows in this case. And then the third case is related to policy analysis, where we want to include the structural changes in logistics in an agent-based simulation and propose policy interventions. By the end of the project, we're striving to develop in the project website the STORM toolbox, which will be a medium where we're going to, in a digested way, we're going to propose different kind of information generated out of the project, not only the project deliverables as main outcomes of the project, but also whenever possible, different data sources, different scenarios that we're going to elaborate, outcomes of the scenarios, or any relevant information that comes out of the project. So it will appear in a later point of time, and we'll be happy if you visit our website and keep updated on the latest developments. The impact of STORM comes from different directions, but mostly from generating knowledge through identified freight and logistics knowledge gaps and needs. Then the impact also comes from developing novel freight and logistics concepts in order to enable the deployment of innovative and sustainable transport systems. Then through the generated outputs of the project, we are striving to enable capabilities for research and business, and also to design and analysis of new concepts, methods, and tools to support the transport and mobility researchers. In addition, we also striving to translate the generated knowledge into policy recommendations in order to support the sustainable transition of the freight and logistics transport, and then also into definition of future directions for freight and logistics. If you're interested to collaborate with us, we'll be very happy to keep in touch and invite you. You can follow the project STORM through its website and social media links in order to update how to participate in the stakeholder engagement and review meetings that are coming after the holiday season, and also to participate in the future events organized by STORM. And also how to, of course, if you're interested to share data with us or use case scenarios in order to tailor further or use case scenarios in STORM, we'll be happy also to discuss and collaborate with you. And of course, in helping us to translate the generated knowledge out of the project into future policies recommendations. But this is in brief from my side, and if you want to keep in touch with us, just check the project website and the LinkedIn and Twitter accounts in order to get the latest updates from the project. Thank you. Back to you, Carmela.
Thank you very much, Jancho. This was very informative. Now we will go to the first panel, moderated by Jonathan Kohler, and with speaker Francis Spray and Andreas Nestrater that Jonathan is going to introduce now.
Yep, that's right. You're going to share the screen, Camila?
Yes,
Great.
It should be.
Yep, we can see it now.
Now.
Thank you very much.
Perfect.
Okay, so welcome everybody from my side. I'm Jonathan Kohler from the Fraunhofer Institute of Innovation and Systems Analysis in Karlsruhe, Germany, one of the project members of this consortium, the STORM Consortium, and I'll be taking you through the first of our short panels this afternoon on technology developments. And we have two contributors today, Francis Spray from Chalmers and Andreas Nestrater from the IML in Dortmund. And they will each, starting with Francis, give you a few thoughts about where technologies might go. After each of the contributions, we'll have a short few minutes to answer a couple of questions on the Slido, which Carmela will take you through. And we'll have a little bit of time for questions after the two speakers have finished. Okay, so let me just give you a couple of details about our two speakers today. Francis is an associate professor at the University of Technology in Göteborg in Sweden, Chalmers University, and her specializations are in sustainable transport and its sustainable energy technologies in transport. Her research methods are interdisciplinary, combining quantitative methods such as econometrics with qualitative methods such as interviews to take into account economic, political, technical, and behavioral aspects of new technologies in freight and also mobility. Andres is responsible for strategic initiatives and European cooperation at the Fraunhofer Institute for Material Flow and Logistics in Dortmund. His focus is on innovative ICT solutions for logistics and manufacturing, including the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and autonomous systems. He has a background in computer science and mechanical engineering and is the vice chair for innovative ICT in ALICE, the network for the European Technology Platform on Logistics. So with that introduction, I'll ask Francis to give us her thoughts.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. And I'm going to set my presentation a bit in the background of the climate challenge that we are facing and how we reaching the Paris Agreement and the responsibility and what the implication of this for the freight sector. So if we look a little bit of what is needed, looking into there, we would need a reduction of CO2 emissions on the order of 55 to 67% until 2030s for new trucks. And if we say on this line, we see that industry has agreed on that we need to also have this reduction and say that all new commercial vehicles will be fossil free by 2040. However, the question is this is enough if we want to meet the 1.5 degree warming target. And probably that is not enough, that we would need a target of 100% already by 2034 to 2038, according to that. So do we have time to wait? Probably not, and we have to go and pick a winner now. So I'm saying this in a little bit of provocative sense, because normally, especially as a researcher, one is always, well, it depends on this, and we have to have different options open. But what if we actually take another turn on and see that we actually put all R&D, all kind of investments into one option to make sure that that one happens? And if that option is battery electric trucks, even for long haul, what would you actually say that is needed? Well, there are some studies that actually look in this direction and that see, in most of studies, even if what is that the fast charging network is an essential part in this. And that includes up to 1 megawatt charging stations for trucks. Another option would be some kind of electric roads or a combination of this. We need more R&D and more development on batteries, where they need to reach prices around $100 per kilowatt hours, functioning actually even for heavy duty. Now, I know some of you probably seen from like Bloomberg and so on that we are close to this target, but if you actually see the numbers for what it goes into trucking, they are closer to $300 in Europe at the moment. In China, there are lower prices. So there still needs to be an actual reduction in price from batteries. Cycle capacity from the batteries also has to increase to roughly around 500 cycles, which affects the lifetime and the possibility to go in and do fast charging for it. And we need to also increase energy output per kilogram of the batteries to be able to get around weight issues. And related to that, we also have battery production capacity that needs to increase if we're going to increase the volumes and even those domestically in Europe, and reinforcement of the electricity grid to be able to meet the possibility to install a charging capacity in the order of 1 megawatt. There are still challenges such as special use cases with very heavy loads and also higher speeds. A lot of these studies that look into this possibility presume lower speeds, but it's while long distance trucking has a very small share of it, it's unclear exactly how large share of these special cases would actually be. And can we find some other solution for them rather than going for a completely other technology? So that's my short, condensed, and a little bit provocative presentation.
Thank you very much, Francis. And now I think we have the first Slido question. Here we go. So the question is, how much do you agree from 1, don't agree at all, to 10, I agree completely, for saying all trucks, including long haul, will be battery electric in the future? Let's see what you think. Right. So, Carmela, how do we see how many people have actually voted? We'll just give a minute or two, and then we'll proceed.
So I think 9 people has voted so far. I will put on again the link and hashtag, and also you can go directly to the Slido question if you scan the QR code with your mobile.
Great. Thank you very much for that contribution then, Francis. We'll discuss it on the Slido question in a few minutes' time. But now I would like to ask Andreas to give his thoughts on technology developments. Over to you, Andreas.
Yes. So I would come from a slight different direction to look also at this to get to zero emissions or to low emissions. But I would say in addition to what Francis said, I would say for me the collaboration in logistics and freight transport will be crucial to increase the efficiency and to get to lower emissions in logistics, because I just looked up the few numbers, and I think we already have a lot of capacities which are unused. This not only includes the trucks. I think here's one number which is only for German trucks, so it's a very national perspective, but I guess in Europe it will look quite the same. There it is, only 35% of the track capacities are really used. Of course, this includes the number of empty returns and everything, but I think we have a lot of capacity already available, which if it's better used, we only by raising the efficiency will get lower emissions without the need to change or to discuss about go we for battery electric trucks or we'll keep the ones, because as we have heard, industry says they will need until 2040 to go fully electric. So I think here we have the chance also with the old technology to already get a raise in efficiency. And of course, battery electric trucks will not solve other problems like we have in cities or on the highways with the congestion, with some other emissions which are not coming from the what is the English name? Not the steam engines, the combustion engines. So I think so yeah, right. So for me, one step to go get lower emissions is really to work together in logistics. And if you switch to the next slide, I think we already are talking about topics in logistics which would foster this collaboration. So one of the main topics today is logistic data spaces or information models. So first point, share data. I think this is heavily connected with what is in the second paragraph under the data infrastructure. So we are discussing today a lot about how to share data, of course, with the goal to use this data to optimize logistics. I think what is also, and this is already installed in some cities or in some distribution centers, is the idea of why don't we share what we already have? This can be shared networks, shared transports, shared warehouses. There are already some kind of consolidation centers before the cities, so that you consolidate and then only one truck needs to go into the city and not not 5 ones which are only half loaded. And I also think this goods consolidation and bundling is one important topic, because I think it is at this topic, it's quite interesting because not one company can do it on their own. Not even, let's say, the biggest logistic companies of the world, even they have their borders and they have their limits within their own networks. And I think the next step would be at least to share capacities, or at least to open your own network to really use what is already there. And I think this is something what we also discussed before this meeting. If you look at the Green Deal and you read there, okay, 70% should be shifted away from the road. I think if we would use what is already there in a much more optimized way, then we would get it would not be moved away from the road, but we can get rid of the trucks who are already today transporting mostly air all the time. And from my point of view, looking at the already existing technologies, for me, we need to think about how to foster the collaboration based on digitalization. And I think here, I've given some other examples. It's about the data gathering, like Internet of Things. There are those digital twin concepts. We are talking a lot about artificial intelligence. So I think on the technology level, most of the stuff is already there, what we need. But now we need to go the step that companies are willing to collaborate even with their competitors. And I'm not talking that they should all give up their business model. But I think also for many companies, it would be a benefit if they would get a higher filling rate of their trucks, because they are driving anyway. If they could earn some money by transporting stuff from other ones, it would be a benefit for all sides. Yeah, this coming from another perspective, mainly focusing on the collaboration in logistics.
Great, thanks very much, Andreas. Camilla, do you want to show us the next Slido question, please?
Absolutely.
So the question is, how much do you agree from 1, not at all, to 10, completely agree? Collaboration is crucial to increase efficiency and lower emissions in logistics. We'll just leave that question up for a couple of minutes.
So I guess it's not as provocative as first question. So I guess many
Well,
people would say yes.
maybe the provocative question is it possible or not, as
Yeah.
opposed to whether it's desirable. Okay, so as Carmela said, you can continue to answer the questions on through the link and hashtag, or through the barcode on the screen here. And I think now we can open the discussion. If you have any questions for either or both of the panelists, please write your question down in the question section.
And maybe in the meanwhile, we can give the overview of people who voted for this last question.
So at the moment, that looks like a pretty uncontroversial position, Andreas, but we'll see. At the moment, while people are thinking about their questions, I'll just get us going. And I think a question which relates directly to what Francis was saying is the traditional dilemma of innovation policy, if I may put it that way. Should you pick winners? And if you should, when do you pick winners? You said provocatively that battery electric trucks are the way ahead. What are the benefits if you did say, right, let's go for that route, compared to saying, right, we'll try and invest in some of the other alternatives as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question. And I guess the benefit is that you can actually direct resources, both like monetary and intellectual resources, to actually developing the technology. Timing is a good question, and that's why I would say, if I would have not said as easily that you could pick a winner just a few years ago, but the whole technological development is going very rapidly, and just looking through reports, even when I look at reports from like 2018, which are 3 years ago, they feel outdated compared to what you see today. And therefore we see that today we are quite close to what is a breakthrough in battery technology that enables for longer and longer distances, and even more cost efficient possibilities for battery electric trucks compared to just a few years ago. So then the question is, that's why it is maybe a time in which you start thinking of, is that the time in which you actually then ramp up and speed up and actually put all the investment into that to make sure to get that, those last, what is it, 10, 20%, or I mean, it's only 4% of the trips that are above a certain length that is not possible to carry. But even with that, there might still be some other cases. So even if you say that it's 10% of the trips or like 20% of the activity, maybe we need to put in focus in developing the technology that is closest to that. So that's why I think now it's a good time to at least start considering that, compared to going in parallel tracks.
So let me just ask you back on that one. So two things there for me. Does that mean that battery technology is advancing both in terms of its power density and the infrastructure and the cost more quickly than the main alternative, which is hydrogen fuel cells, as is most commonly understood? Or do you think it's a matter of, if you choose to invest in batteries, that's the one that will win?
So, I mean, there has been more momentum around batteries lately, and I think that has been driven because they've been in different markets. Well, in fuel cells, we've seen there's been discussion for fuel cells for a very long time, but they've always been a few years into the future, even if now, there's always this promise of fuel cells breaking through.
Yeah.
Well, battery trucks we actually see, even if we don't see for the really long haul ones, but for medium distance, we actually see battery trucks out rolling today. So yes, I would say right now the momentum is a little bit larger for battery trucks compared to fuel cells and
Right.
hydrogen. Even if you look at the last years, the development within fuel cell technology, that has also improved at a high speed. So
Okay. Well, thanks very much for that. I still don't see any questions yet. Maybe everybody's busily answering the Slido. For a question for you then, Andreas. We've seemed to have more or less agreed that collaboration is a good thing. The question is, how can you achieve it? In particular, from my side, I think the real question is, how do you get over the problem of sharing what is actually commercial in confidence data some of the time?
Yeah, that's. I think this is the key question because if we are not able to, let's say, convince, even if this is not the right word because they should be self-convinced, but to convince industry, I think for that we need to find some kind of neutral or common ground. So what we've seen during the last years is there are a lot of activities where you find platforms to share transport capacities or whatever, but they were all not really able to get a larger amount of the market. There are a lot of alternatives, but like in every platform model, they would be only successful if there is one and not if there are 25 all in parallel and they are sharing the market. So what we are currently seeing is that in industry there is a high motivation to go perhaps for joint open source development. So to say, what do we really need a commercial platform to which we all need to connect, and then we have again this vendor lock-in, and then we have one mighty monolithic platform, and this is what the logistic companies are afraid. They don't want to be disconnected from their customers. They want to stay in direct contact with the customers, and I only see the chance that there needs to be a development which is open, neutral, driven by the companies themselves, so that they get the trust in this solution, and that they are able to, let's say, not only collaborate on this logistics perspective, but that they also collaborate in the software development. So there should be a way, and we've seen, if you look at other open source initiatives, I think there is the chance, at least, to get this kind of, I don't know how to call it, but to get this kind of common logistics infrastructure in an IT definition of the word infrastructure. I think there you can see a lot of developments, like the always quoted Linux, where also many competing companies are developing together this kind of kernel system and the components, and then they use it, and on top of that, they are building their own distributions or their own applications. And currently it is discussed a lot in logistics if this could be a way, to try to think about also to develop basic components which can be used by everyone, because especially important for logistics is we are often just quoting the big ones, the DHL, Kühne, Nagel, and Schenkers, but they are not driving the trucks. They are the ones organizing the network, and we need to also get all the small and medium-sized companies in, and for that we need easy and applicable solutions which are not complicated in the way you need millions of people to install them, and also not to that they have the need to invest a lot of money. So I think it's just an outlook. I don't know the solution, otherwise I would do it on my own. But I think this idea of thinking about if open source and joint developments could be a first step, especially to establish the trust.
Right, okay. And we have an interesting question in the chat that I will read out for you from Sophie Maria Telt. Dear panel speakers, do you believe service-based business model trends could play a role in enabling swift electrification of the road freight sector? And her idea is that if actors in the freight transport value chain would turn away from the individual ownership of trucks and other related assets, or rather, the accompanying higher costs would then be not so directly faced. And if you were using on-demand leasing, rental, or pay-per-use services, it would potentially reduce the overall volume of electrified trucks that were needed. In other words, if you have these sharing business models, would that actually enable physical collaboration, the bundling that you were mentioning, Andreas? And would that then also enable economies of scale in the technology development, Francis? Who would like to answer first? Maybe
I could
Francis.
go for I could start. I think maybe my part's answer is the easier one for it, because it is true that one of the hurdles for electrification is the higher investment costs, and the higher investment costs go both for the trucks and for the charging infrastructure, which there are different actors dealing with that, but still investment costs are one of the barriers for it. So if one can get around with business models to not have to do the same investments, especially for maybe smaller actors that do not have maybe the capital investment opportunities, then I can see that would help with electrification. And you also see that normally that technologies, also new technologies, like in general within transport, are sometimes easier adopted by some kind of service economy or some bigger fleet that can invest in the upfront cost in an easier way.
Right. And what do you think about the potential for collaboration, Andreas?
I think this question or the idea which is mentioned there is already showing this kind of collaboration. So if you think about this individual ownership, I think with trucks you don't even have it, especially if you are thinking about, again, the big ones who don't own trucks, they use the third-party suppliers with their trucks. But I think my idea was perhaps not going that far, so not to get rid of the ownership, but to share the ownership. So there's still one owner, but capacity will be shared. So I think this idea is, from my point of view, going in exactly the same direction, but it's even one step beyond. So even to get away from this individual ownership, and then it's something, but then you already need someone who's able to offer this on-demand services, because in the end, that's the worst thing in logistics. You have physical goods to transport, so you need cars, trucks, infrastructure. So in the end, you of course still need someone who's offering this on-demand services, and he will have all the problems which are now shared among each other. But I think it would be one step to the collaboration.
Okay. How are we doing for time? We're doing okay for time, but it's beginning to be time to wrap up. It's been a brief session, but I think it's produced some interesting points. Carmela, would you like to show us the results for the Slido questions?
Absolutely. So we have the one from the first question.
Right. Well, Francis, you've done a very good sales job there, I think. Let's all buy shares in battery companies, I think is the message from that. So it's, or to put it slightly more technically, the average score is around 7 from 22 participants. So most people think that batteries are the way things do seem to be going. Okay.
And
how about the second question?
Second question.
And yeah, it looks like people are convinced collaboration is the way to go. And if that includes some of the practitioners, I think that is also actually an interesting piece of information, because if there is a general perception that collaboration in the industry is necessary to make the technological changes that we are facing, that's, I think, a necessary condition, a prerequisite for companies actually saying, yes, this is actually going to happen, let's take a bit of a risk and try it out. Okay.
And
so
we also have 2 questions from the audience here.
Yeah, let's see if we've got a couple of minutes. Let's try and have a answer these. So let's ask them the opposite way around this time. Francis, do you think collaboration is enough, taking into consideration the increasing demand for freight and logistics in the future, or do we need to do something else as well?
Oh, so I get to answer the collaboration question.
That's right.
We changed the roles.
Right. We changed the roles here. Well, no, I think so I normally go the opposite when people ask me if electrification is enough, and I normally say that it's necessary, but it's not enough. And I guess I would say the same thing with collaboration. I think what we have to realize is, if we are going to meet the Paris Agreement with, like, especially meeting a 1.5 target, then like we can't rely on just one solution. We can't rely just on technology, and we can't rely just on collaboration or increase the efficiency in the transport sector. We actually have to work with different things at the same time. So if I go for one solution when it comes to technology, I don't think it's one solution when it comes to, when we're looking at the system perspective, when it comes to reducing emissions. And also, if we're going to take into account other issues that Andreas brought up, which have to do with local emissions, with cities and congestion and building of infrastructure needs and so on, which also we must remember, if we're going in and investing in infrastructure, that also has a carbon footprint in it. So therefore we need to have this like broader perspective and to take that to meet the challenges.
Okay, thanks so much, Francis. And if you were investing in a logistics company, Andres, would you be thinking of electric trucks and electric vehicles, or would you be spending your money developing open source software? Let me put it that way.
I think that the prior answer is also for me true for this question. So I don't see that this is an A or B. I think both is needed, and at least from my perspective, it seems also that many of the people, when changing to electric trucks or vans, they are also thinking about adopting their digital processes. Because, just because of they need to handle the e-trucks in a different way than the old ones. So perhaps they need to change their route planning. Perhaps they can offer more services because they get more modern telemetry systems or whatever, just thinking out loud. But I think also here it is not A or B, it would be both. I think often it is easier to buy new trucks because this only costs money. If you go to this
organizational change,
and yes, and I think in this collaboration, this is often you need to change often your mindset, and especially when we are discussing this with family-owned smaller companies, they often have another perspective on digitalization than the global ones who have thousands of IT developers in their background. So I think it's again both needs to be done, and I think it's an individual decision in those companies with what they should start or with what they will start. But in the end, they need to do both.
Yeah, but I think that's a very interesting point that you've raised there, that the fact that especially in logistics transport firms, where there's this sort of binary distribution of a few very large operators and then lots of very small operators, for a small operator, it's a big challenge to say, right, we're going to adopt a whole new series of operating methods. So there's a question how they are going to find the capacity to make those changes to their business planning and operations planning. Right. Well, thank you very much, both of you, and thank you for the questions. I think we will finish this part of the session on time and hand back to Carmela and go over to the second part of our seminar this afternoon. Thanks very much for your attention, everybody.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, Francis and Andreas. So now we'll be going to the second panel on policy drivers and barriers for freight. So our speakers for today are Dr. Jonathan Kohler, that you have all already seen, and Jelko Jeftic from Etico, and Simon Susan. So a short introduction. Jonathan Kohler is a senior scientist at the Fraunhofer Institute for Innovation and System Analysis, and his research interests are innovation theory, especially sustainability transition applied to sustainable transport. Then we have Jelko Jeftic is the Deputy Director of the Innovation and Deployment at Ertico, and he has a strong technical background, and his interests are in CITS, urban mobility, and freight innovation. And he's always striving to reduce environmental impact of mobility and improve its sustainability. Last but not least, we have Simon Susan, a freight analyst at the Transport and Environment, Europe's leading clean transport campaign group. His research focuses on trends in freight, transport, and the pathway to achieve zero emission freight. So we will start with Jonathan, and please, Jonathan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Yes, my microphone is switched on. Great.
It is.
And we've got the screen. Okay, so I just have this one slide, so that's easy enough. And what I want to briefly talk about this afternoon from the point of view of policy drives and barriers is two broad aspects. Firstly, innovation in many fields often concentrates on the technological side of innovation. And one thing I try to do in my work is to think, yeah, innovation is technology driven, of course, but also it depends on where the demand is coming from. And for the future of freight transport, what sorts of changes in the structure of demand might we be seeing in the future? For me, is a very important question, especially when you read people like DHL's logistics reports. In their annual reports, they make a big play of the changes that digitalization in particular will bring. They emphasize, and you see this in the organization of distribution over the last 2 years, this ever more quickly, ever faster delivery organization, with the objective of getting delivery times from internet orders down to a few hours, so less than 24 hours. And that, in principle, of course, is beginning to change the way distribution is organized to a more decentralized system rather than a national centralized hub delivering to all the sites around the country. They're beginning to see more localized distribution centers. And the question then is, how does that interact with the new technologies that we're talking about, with these issues around bundling of goods, bundling of deliveries? Another aspect of this is also the idea of individualized production and bespoke markets. If you have a fully integrated, digitalized production chain with automated supply, delivery ordering systems, but also going straight through to the production line, you are able to produce an individualized goods and services, but in goods in particular, to a level that's almost a complete contrast to Henry Ford. And how is that then going to change the way freight logistics systems are organized? The benefit of that, of course, is that you can offer very individually tailored products. And you can also, if you have bespoke markets and a more decentralized market structure, split a market up into all sorts of different categories, like according to age groups for consumer goods, or according to volume of production for manufacturers. So there's, in principle, for me, the potential for a significant change in the way digitalized logistics will be organized because of digitalization. The other point I wanted to make about demand is globalization and global patterns of supply chains. I'm sure many of you will have seen the announcements recently from the G7 summit in Cornwall. They've announced, whether you believe it or not is another question, but they've announced a transport infrastructure plan to keep complete with the China Belt and Road Initiative, which is actually spending an awful lot of money in terms of buying influence, but also in terms of generating new transport infrastructures in places which didn't have anything, like the new port in Pakistan. So is there a question? So the question I'm trying to raise is, are the geographical patterns also going to change in the future? So you might have different market organizations based on electronic supply chains, but you also have different geographical patterns of transport infrastructure. So I can see a big potential for changes in demand. The other aspect that I wanted to address is what we have so far identified. They'll be asking this in more broader terms as well. The climate policy, the importance of environmental issues in decision-making in logistics. I guess it's really a question of, do we believe this is really going to happen? So from the industry side, obviously one is cost-driven, and all the alternative solutions that are being discussed, like battery electric trucks as opposed to fuel cell trucks, involve a considerable increase in the investment of the infrastructure and also of the vehicles. But, so you're not going to do that unless you absolutely have to. On the other hand, there is beginning to be, in some respects there already is, significant environmental legislation around local air emissions that is forcing diesel engine manufacturers to change their technologies. If things continue like this over the next 10 years to 2030 or 25, we can see very restrictive legislation on the emissions from internal combustion engine vehicles, which will maybe make it actually cheaper and simpler to adopt solutions like fuel cells and battery electric trucks. And I think my guess, and it is a guess of course, about what will happen over the next 10 or 15 years is that we will see a change in the relative total costs of ownership, away from fossil fuels being the obvious default choice to, well, if you're going to use fossil fuels, it's going to cost you a lot of money, and you're going to have a complicated system on the end to remove the emissions, etc., etc. So I think there will be a move towards zero carbon fuels. The question then is, how does the logistics industry take that into account? Where do we find the organization and the money to make the large-scale investments that will be required? Those are the points that I wanted to raise for now. Thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. And I also know you have a question for our audience.
Well, that's right.
Yeah. So, will digitalization change the way logistic markets work? So you can go to the question through the link and the hashtag, or directly via QR code. So we will be leaving this question open. So far, only 8 people have voted, so we allow a couple of seconds more on screen, and then the question will stay open. So once you are on the website, you will continue seeing it. And in the meanwhile, we can go to our next speaker. Jelko, please. This is your slide.
Thank you very much, Carmela. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm usually what is called a tree hugger in our office, basically. I don't hug trees very often, but I'm very much environmentally focused as a father of 2 young kids. This is also why I focus very much on finding different ways of how we can decarbonize transport and logistics. I fully agree with Francis that we will need to, amongst other things, go for electrification of trucks, zero emission trucks, and in a much shorter future than we are looking at. Right now, we are looking at 2050 from the policy perspective. From the truck OEMs, they are talking about zero emission trucks by 2040. I believe that everything that we see today is going to be pushed much closer in the future, because the climate change effects are just becoming more and more visible. And it's weird to say, but actually, in some aspects, thanks to COVID, which is a horrible situation, but thanks to COVID, I think that governments and authorities have actually finally realized that they do have possibility and responsibility to act in quite drastic ways to make sure that thousands or hundreds of thousands of people do not die, basically, because as we usually say, there's no vaccine against climate change. So I believe that all of these policies are going to be shifted much faster. Then I come back to the point that I wanted to raise, and that is the digitalization, automation, and overall optimization. So Andreas raised one very important point, and that is about optimizing load factor on trucks. What I wanted to raise is actually that we have a number of different elements, in addition to the load factor, that are creating inefficiency in supply chains. For example, if your truck is arriving to a port and the ship is delayed and your truck needs to wait for a couple of hours, you are going to have an inefficiency of a couple of hours that is basically going to cost you a little bit more money. There are other inefficiencies that are creating more environmental impact, more emissions, etc., etc. So we need really to analyze the entire situation with fully electric trucks. How do we optimize the supply chain, and how do we cut down on the inefficiencies? If you go to the next slide, please. I want to use one example from the policy point of view, and that is the electronic freight transport documents. I have been working with these specific type of documents since 2016, and I've been working with many of the European countries and governments, and governments also outside. What is really interesting is that when you are sending a truck today to send goods from, let's say, Belgium to Germany, you are today not allowed to have electronic freight documents. You still are required by the German authorities, for example, to show the paper documents that are showing, for example, who is the sender, who is the receiver of the goods, who is what goods you are carrying, etc., etc. So the dark green countries that you see here, and you also see, for example, countries like Belarus, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Oman. These are the countries, but also France and others. These are the countries that currently accept electronic freight documents. All of the other countries that are in white don't do that yet. Now, the good thing is that we also have so-called electronic freight information regulation that is entering Europe in 2024. So from 2024, all of the European authorities will be required, legally required, to accept electronic freight information. So by that time, hopefully we are going to be catching up with countries like Mexico, Brazil, and India, who already are quite digitalized when it comes to their national transports. This is also one of the things that we see is coming more and more, but it's also taking just incredible amount of time. And even when electronic freight transport information regulation comes into force, it will not mandate the transport operators, the shippers, the industry itself to actually use the electronic freight documents. If you still want to use the paper documents, which are still used to 99% of all of the transport in Europe, it is going to be possible. And I believe that digitalization, when it's until we reach the 100% stage, it is going to take us probably 2 more decades until we are at that stage, which is really ridiculous, because when we think about it, all of us have smartphones, all of us are dealing with many electronic documents, contracts are made on electronic basis. Still, the transport sector is very traditional, and if you allow everybody to have their own opinion, everybody is going to go with their own pace. And having worked with transport operators, the shippers and the industry on logistics side for the past 17 years, I'm very much convinced that this is very traditional industry, and we need to have right suitable policies and regulations to put this in place. Now, another way to encourage the industry to digitalize is, as already mentioned, carbon pricing. We need to have much more transparency in the transport sector. You know, if you look at the Green Deal proposal, the European Commission would like to go towards 70% of shift of freight transport from road to other sustainable transports. We had that discussion in our group. It is going to be super challenging, but digitalization is basically the backbone of all of these developments. Digitalization, modal shift, electrification, decarbonization. So we need to move much faster, and it is going to be quite challenging task ahead of us, but we should not be asking us, can we do it? We simply have to do it, because we talk very often about decarbonization and about future generation and climate change. Climate change is not about future generations. It is already here for our kids and for ourselves. So we need to act today and to be quite drastic with movements that we make on digitalization to support overall transport. So I think this is also another tree-hugger, let's say, somewhat provocative statement from my side to kick off the debate.
Thank you very much, Jelko. It's great to hear from you on this topic. Now we will go to Simon. Oh, yeah.
Yes, thank you very much, Carmela. So yeah, today I will talk about the deployment of adequate charging infrastructure for battery electric trucks, and more precisely, I will also talk about the policy drivers and barriers as we see it in transport and environment. So first of all, to give you a bit of context, we know today how much chargers are needed for battery electric trucks in the EU, thanks to several studies. And we also know that current European laws only see very low numbers of battery electric trucks and zero emission trucks. So for example, in the Smart and Sustainable Mobility Strategy, we only have 80,000 battery electric trucks in EU's road in 2030. And in the AFID, so the Alternative Fuel Infrastructure Directive, we don't have any zero emission trucks at all. And this is quite different from what TNE sees, because we foresee between 480,000 and 650,000 battery electric trucks, or zero emission trucks, sorry, in 2030 on EU's road, according to recent announcements made by the OEMs. So this shows that there is a big gap between current European laws and what is likely to happen based on what the OEMs recently announced. And if you go to the next slide, so yes, that's it. Now we know how much chargers are needed for battery electric trucks across the EU. The question is now, how can we actually make that happen? So we identified some drivers and some barriers on the political side. And yeah, first of all, as drivers, we think that an ambition revision of the AFID could help a lot. So the AFID, as I said, is the Alternative Fuel Infrastructure Directive. And for example, binding targets on the number of semi-public and public chargers could help a lot to ensure that we have sufficient chargers across the continent. But we could also have minimum coverage of high-power chargers at urban areas or along the TNT network, for example. That could also help. And we could also have an adequate funding support for electric trucks and for chargers in the European Commission's strategic rollout action plan that will help. So that was like on the AFID side, which will be revised soon as part of the 55 package in July. But we also have the truck CO2 standards. So the truck CO2 standards will set CO2 targets for heavy-duty vehicles, and it will be revised next year. But yeah, if we have ambitious enough CO2 targets for trucks, it will help a lot to accelerate the deployment of battery electric trucks and zero-emission trucks in a more general sense. And therefore, it will help to develop the adequate charging infrastructure that we need. And on the other hand, we also see different barriers that could actually stop or not help developing the chargers we need. So for instance, in the AFID, we still have gas trucks, which are included in the AFID, and we don't have any zero-emission trucks, as I said. And we see it as a very important issue because it would delay the investment in zero-emission technologies, as investment will be wasted for lock-in technologies such as gas trucks, which are not zero emissions, obviously. And on the other hand, we also have potential issues that we identify in the legislative shape of the AFID, which is today a directive and not a regulation. And we think it could be an issue in the time frame because, first of all, because like the directive will be translated into national laws, it could take some years, and then we won't have any targets before maybe 2025. So it will also delay the deployment of the adequate charging infrastructure. But we also think that a directive could lead to a fragmented approach. So we could have maybe regions in the EU with like a lot of chargers, and because of national laws which are ambitious enough, and on the other hand, we could have regions which are left behind and for which we don't have any chargers, or like very few numbers of chargers, and then it will stop or like not help at least the deployment of the chargers we need to have a pan-European network of chargers. So yes, that was the key drivers and barriers that we identify as transport and environment if we want to have the adequate charging infrastructure for battery electric vehicles. Yes, thanks.
Thank you very much, Simon. We now have the one question for you as well on Slido.
Yes.
So the question here is, how much do you agree from 1, not at all, to 10, completely agree, to the following statement? A pan-European chargers network for battery electric trucks should be deployed as fast as possible. So we will leave this question open for a while, and whilst people are answering, we will show the results in a few minutes. I would like to thank you all, first of all, and ask one question to Simon that we have about the financing of this charging infrastructure. Yes. How do you think this is going to happen, or this should happen?
Mm-hmm. So first of all, I would like to say that like in the number of chargers that we need for trucks, it's really like low compared to the number of chargers we would need for cars. For example, for cars we need millions of chargers, but for trucks we only see a need for maybe 40,000 to 50,000 chargers in 2030. So this will be quite low compared to the investment needed for cars, obviously. And we also estimated that like for the upfront cost of chargers, investments for trucks, we only see that it will cost maybe between 9 billion euros and 23 billion euros over a decade. So like between now and 2030 to install the chargers we need. So that's like a bit about the figures, the key figures. And then, as I said, in the AFID, they will also have a strategic rollout action plan that will help a lot, and that could provide new fundings for these chargers. And finally, I would like also to mention that as part of the recovery plans for different member states, some money could be invested in this charging infrastructure that we need. And it was actually mentioned by the European Commission that it should be part of the recovery plans. So yes, I think there are different answers to your question, but just to say that yeah, we can find different ways of funding these chargers we need.
Thank you very much, Simon. Very clear. Now, we have very little time, but I would like to ask one question to Jelko as well. What is the biggest challenge that we have to digitalizing transport operation?
Yeah, and that's a really tricky one. In my perspective, I mean, we have a lot of different challenges. I mean, one of the challenges in Europe is that the vast majority, around 70 to 75% of all transport operators, as an example, are small and medium-sized companies. So it's 1 to 5 truck companies, as an example. But generally, across all of the transport operators, shippers, freight forwarders, and all of the other industry stakeholders, it is really the willingness to change that is the biggest barrier, what I've seen from big and to small companies. You know, you can go to a big company that where the CEO is convinced, yes, we are going to digitalize our operations. You come to middle management who say, okay, that sounds interesting, we will do it. You come down to the, let's say, implementation IT department, even of the biggest companies, and they are saying, yes, we will do it, but please come back in 6 to 9 months because we have other work that needs to be done. So because the transport and logistics is so much focused on day-to-day operations, there's not enough strategic thinking from enough stakeholders. And this is really hindering this willingness to change, really. And I believe that these changes that we are going to see in the market with climate crisis, but also other things, are going to force us to be much more open to identifying new ways of delivering transport than we have been up to now.
Thank you very much, Jelko. And now, last question to Jonathan. And Jonathan, I think you will have 1 minute to answer before we can go and show the Slido results.
Okay.
So where do you think we need to get to in 2030?
Well, if we're going to meet the targets for climate change from the Paris Accord and or even better, the 1.5 degrees C target of climate stabilization by 2050, we've got to start moving now. You don't have to have it all done by 2050, but when you consider the new infrastructures that will be required, I think that's more of a long-term issue than the trucks themselves, even though the trucks do have a lifetime of around 10 years. That leads me to think that we will need at least a basic network along the main routes for the road freight trucks in place by 2030. Whatever the technical solution is, if we're going to have virtually all trucks low carbon by 2040 to 2050, you've got to have got that basic infrastructure in place. I think that's the most important issue. That means that we will also need to have confidence in the reliability of the technologies for the operators. And if we are going to achieve these new low carbon fuels, you will also have to have significant reductions in costs through demonstration programs and early adoption programs on a larger scale than we have today. That's one side of it. Very briefly, I know. The other side is how do we're going to have by 2030, not everybody by a long way, but a reasonable proportion, let me put it that way, of operators who are already involved seriously in low carbon fuel trucks on a commercial basis, and also who have moved in these directions of digitalization and collaborative logistics that we've been talking about today. So there's a lot of work to be done very fast. Thanks.
So thank you, Jonathan, and we better start working very, very soon. So this is your question: will digitalization change the way logistic market works? And this is 100% yes. I don't think I've ever seen this result ever for any other question in Slido, and I think this is a very important. It's a very important result. I mean, we all know that this is digitalization will change the way logistics markets work, and Jelko mentioned that and pushed on that, and we all agree. And for the next question instead, so the pan-European charges network, pan-European charges network for battery electric trucks should be deployed as fast as possible. Yeah, and here as well, the answers, there is a variety of answers from varying from 6 to 10 with a score of 8.5. So it's safe to say that we do indeed need quick deployment of infrastructure for electric trucks. Now we are 1 minute late for our session. I would just like to really say a few things about the discussion here. So we have seen how we think that there will be a policy push to change towards new fuels and fossil fuel for combustion engines will be made more and more expensive, and it will be also a choice not only for to protect the environment, but also a choice of cost. And digitalization is the backbone of all the changes that we are going to see in the next few years in freight, and we should push on that because it's really a driver for change. And my last point from this discussion is that we do need an harmonized and fast deployment of infrastructure to allow electric truck to be consistently on the road. So now what I would do, I will kindly ask to all of our speakers to be again on camera, and maybe the coordinator of Storm, Jancho Todorov, can maybe start with the wrap up, and we will also have an overview on the survey that is going to come from Etico. Please, Jancho.
Thanks, Carmela, and big thanks to our speakers today and our guest Andreas from Buslog project. I would like maybe to use a couple of minutes quickly to wrap up the both discussions. And as we all agreed, digitalization is the way to go. There is no second opinion. But then one big thing is collaboration, and how to really urge the companies to collaborate together in order to optimize the logistics network in the future. Then another big topic is not only to focus on collaboration and also how to include zero-emission vehicles, but also there is like strong implications coming from the deployment of infrastructure, and mostly from charging, because it's a complex landscape which require synchronized collaboration between different kind of actors in the whole chain. And then digitalization on different levels, not only on demand, but also optimizing the vehicles, fleets, operations, and so on. It's a way to go. But then there is also still lots of barriers and lots of problems when it comes to future policies. And for example, what Simon mentioned, there is still the current legislation. It's quite how to say, it's quite ahead of time, but the landscape is changing, but it's not changing fast enough. So the future policies, they should be shaped in a way to support the deployment of innovative services, but not to push too deep beyond the capacity of the current landscape. But thank you, Carmela, and once more thanks to the panelists.
Thank you very much.
Handing over to Jonathan.
Right, very briefly, just before we say thank you and conclude the seminar, I just wanted to take another minute of your time to advertise our online survey. As a part of the early stages of this project, the STORM project, we're reaching out to the stakeholder community. Today's webinar is the first step in that process. We're going to be doing a few interviews with experts, but we're also going to be circulating an online survey. This is going to happen very soon, hopefully, and the survey is going to have the goal of trying to ask the questions that we've started to discuss today in just a little bit more detail, with a little bit more detail on the alternative technologies and some of the issues around technologies and drivers and barriers and emissions. The survey is going to be online, and we'll be circulating it through our usual communications channels from Air2Go and our other collaborators. And the important thing to note is we've tried to have a reasonable amount of detail, allow you to express a few of your own opinions, but also keep it reasonably short, hopefully within 20 to 30 minutes. The survey is just being organized at the moment, and hopefully we'll be getting it out to you in the next week or two. So please do look out for that in your email inboxes, and it would be great if we could have a really great response rate. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. And to that, I would like to add that all the attendees of this webinar will receive an email that will include the slides that we presented during this webinar, the link to the online recording of this webinar, and also the link to the survey, the STORM project survey. So I join Jonathan to ask you to kindly dedicate some of your time to our project to also provide your point of view on the matter. And very much on time, I would like to thank the speakers for a great contribution to the discussion, and to all the attendees who asked questions and who participated. I say goodbye now, and I hope to see you all to our next and upcoming webinar in the future. Thank you very much, and have a nice afternoon. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.